So Joseph, you have a hand for us, a quick sort of small stakes hand, and then you kind of have a question about bankroll and playing small stakes, right?
Yep, yeah.
All right. So where's this hand played out of?
It's actually a game in Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
It's open to the public, but it's not really private neither, but it's got a small pool of players, probably about 40 players, I would say.
Okay.
All right, and the game was 1-3, and we're nine-handed.
And then is there like a buy-in max here?
No, not to the best of my knowledge. I think you can just
Really?
buy in at any amount.
Okay. And how deep are you for this hand?
I have about 1,200, and there's two villains in here. The button, who has about 750, and the small blind, who has about 450, and I cover them both.
Button's at 750 and the small blind's at 450. Wow, is this in a casino or is it like a...
No.
Oh, okay.
It's just a guy runs the game.
Oh, okay. So it's a private game. That's why, and they just don't really cap it. Okay. All right. So
yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, and the button has a $10 straddle on right now. It hasn't normally been straddled throughout the game, but he's got it at $10.
So button is $10 straddle, and then does it go in order?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
It starts with a small blind.
Yeah.
And so the small blind, he limps in for $10. The $10 folds to me. I'm in the hijack with King of Spades, King of Diamonds.
Okay.
And I make it $50.
50. Wow. Okay. I mean,
yeah, I did 4 times and then added the 10. I probably could have went to 60, I think, but
yeah. I mean, so when I'm playing 5-10, or like say when it's 2-5-10 at Encore, I'll either open a 30 or 35, and then I will like sort of add $10 to every limp. So you just make it 5x, which, you know what? It's fine if the game's splashy, more power to you. You know what I'm saying? If people are still you want to find that amount where people are still calling with like the domination types of hands. I always say when people ask me, well, what's the ideal amount of, opponents to have like when you raise with aces or kings? And I'm like, I don't really think of it that way. I sort of think about what is the most amount of money that people are calling with dominated hands. And that's where I want to actually find that sort of sweet spot. And sometimes it can be increments of $5, but just because, when you raise to an amount and then you get 7 callers with aces, people are like, oh, that's a mistake, too many callers. And I look at it like, well, you probably didn't raise enough, not necessarily to thin the field. It's just that you would have gotten probably more money in pre-flop if you had raised larger. So I don't have an issue with it. So you go to 50, okay?
All right, and button makes the call and the small blind calls.
So button, who's in the straddle, calls.
Mm-hmm.
And the small blind calls. And you're away to 150 here. Again, button 750 starts with 750, and the small blind's got like 400 left. So button has 700 left, small blind's got 400 left. Okay.
And the flop is Jack of clubs, 9 of spades, 4 of spades.
Okay. That's not a bad flop for you here. And I mean, obviously, you'll see more people flat call with hands at this level than they will as you move up. The other thing, too, is that you said, is this another little nuanced thing? It's an occasional straddle. Is that right? It's not on all the time? Okay.
No.
So a lot of people will play kind of a little bit tighter and more passive with a large occasional straddle. So you've got two types of setup. You've got like a mandatory straddle where literally you're playing like 3 blinds all the time. And then you have an occasional straddle, and especially a bigger one here where it's plus 10, where people will play, because it's getting bigger, you will see, I would say, even though it's not correct, you will see more people flat with like Jack, and 9 here. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if the button can have Jack here, where you would think it would always be like a slam dunk 3-bet, just because it's an occasional straddle. So you just have to keep that in mind. But in general, it's a decent flop.
Yeah, and you hit the nail right on the head. They do that.
Yeah.
Small blind checks to me, and then I think I'm unblocking a jack, and a spade draw is going to call. So I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to, overbet the pot. I didn't want to bet too much because, relative size, is an issue there. So I made it 175.
Wow.
So I bet just about 25 over the pot because I thought, I can get called by, a lot of those things, and I don't think that they're going to fold too much.
Again, so I would say that if you have a reason where the game is very, very splashy and no one's ever going to fold a jack here or a spade draw and you want to get maximum value, I could get behind such a large bet. What you want to avoid, which doesn't seem like it's this type of setup, is what I like to call old man coffee post-flop syndrome. I don't know if I've ever said it that way. Old man coffee post-flop syndrome is a situation where old man coffee raises with like queen, queen plus pre, right? Aces, kings, and queens. And so they raise it up and you know that they're very strong and you maybe get a couple callers. So let's say it was like a regular, it was like a regular 2-5 game, like where the guy raised to 20, got 2 callers and the pot 60. And then the board comes out like this. And the guy comes out and he bets like 100 or 120 on the flop. And he's not doing that thinking the way that you are, where he's going to get called by worse. He's just doing it to avoid the bad beat for protection. And when you have a guy like that come out and bet 2x the size of the pot, it allows his opponents to just fold. Like if I had called that guy with Jack 10 and he came out and he bet 120 on this board into a $60 pot, I would just fold. Now, if you're playing in a Denver area home game where these guys aren't going to fold any of these types of holdings anyways, I could sort of get on board with it. I mean, the only thing I would say is that you're really not all that deep. So, 125 might accomplish the same type of thing. When you go to 175, you might not get the lighter calls from like 9x that might call at like 125. That's it. That's the only thing. You just don't want to be betting. You just want to have your mentality. I'm not betting because I'm scared, but I'm betting because I think this is the best way to get the most amount of money for value in the pot.
Right, and that's what I thought. And I thought $200 or anything 200 or over is going to, get those types of folds, which I didn't want.
Mm-hmm. So you go 175, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Then the button jams at that point.
So the button who had 400, he just jams. Now,
no, the button with 700.
Oh, the button with 700, he jams. Okay, so the button jams. Okay.
So it's a little over 500 to me at that point.
So the button jams for 700.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then the small blind quickly calls and he puts the rest of his stack in.
So he calls all in for 400, it looks like total.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's take a look at this here. So first thing that I'm going to do in this spot, and then there's many kind of different things going on because obviously it's a 1-3 game, but I always like to look at the math here first. So the math here in this spot is that it is going to be 175 plus 700 is 875, and then another 400 is 1275. So it's about 1425 in the pot, and it's going to be 525 for you to call. 1425 in the pot, 525 for you to call. So you're getting close to 3-1. However, the other thing that you have to realize is that you're up against 2 opponents. So if you were getting straight 3-1 against one opponent, you'd look at this very easily and you'd say, okay, well, do I have 25% equity against his range of shoving, right? Here, you actually need to have like 25% equity. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but to make it easy, 25% equity against 2 people. And the reason why it's a little bit more complicated is because it looks like you guys have a little bit of a side pot between you and the button. Like it looks like the side pot's going to be like $300 each, right? So it starts to get a little bit complicated because you can lose to the small blind and you can beat the button and you win back $300, right? You're going to get back 300. You're actually going to lose only 100 from the hand. So it is definitely, whenever it's multi-way in a spot like this, it's definitely troublesome because of the fact that the way that I first looked at this, Joe, was I thought initially that the button was the guy with 400. Now it's like, if the button was the guy that started with 400, it wouldn't be that scary because that's his only move, right? Like if he had 400. But the button's got 700 here. And you overbet the pot. That's the other thing too. Like if you had started a bet of like 50 or 60, or God forbid, even half the size of the pot, or even 100, and then this action went down, it would be a little bit less concerning for me because it looks like you are not bluffing when you go 175. The small blind calling all in, do you know anything about the small blind here?
Yeah, absolutely. I do. He actually plays in the home game that I play. He's very wide, so I
Do you think the small blind would? Do you think the small blind would call all in against this action with like King Jack? Like you bet 175, button shoves all. Is he going to call all in with Ace Jack, Queen Jack, something like that for his whole stack?
yeah,
He is.
yes, yes,
If he's that bad, then that makes it good for you, right? Because normally in a situation like this, you'd be like, wow, that's a really strong call all in from the small blind. So
right,
if the small blind has hands that you beat when he calls all in, then it really boils down to the button and the question of, does the button ever overplay a Jack X, or does he ever play like a draw like this?
right. And the button is he's pretty aggressive at times, and I've played with him a handful of times, but he is super wide. I mean, offsuit, cards and stuff like that, and isn't afraid to put a lot of pressure on people.
I think that there's also the possibility, and I agree with it. I actually am looking down at the chat, and I agree with what most people are saying. They have the same feeling as me. The other possibility of somebody like moving, really playing Jack X of spades here strong. Here's my take. I think I kind of want to fold here. Like, I think I kind of want to fold. And if it was a casino, like if it was your typical like daytime, like if I was waiting for 1-3 and this setup happened at Encore, especially with a $10 like rare straddle, I think this is an easy fold. Okay. But you always have to take into account the splashiness of kind of like a home game, and the lower the stakes that it is, it can't be that bad to call getting like 3-1. Especially too, you have to take into account, and again, we're not robots. Even if normally I don't normally talk about this when the game doesn't have a cap on it. Sometimes I've talked about, like in restricted buy-in games, I will sometimes take slightly the worst of it and gamble to get more money on the table. Here, you're in an uncapped game, so that really shouldn't come into play. However, if these guys aren't going to rebuy though, meaning like if they go to felt, they're not going to buy in and cover you. They might just buy in 300-400. Then if you make a gambly call and you lose, then they'll have more money in front of them, and you can cover them if you're comfortable doing that. So these are all the little things that would sort of play into my head here. So I think it would kind of be a gambly call. I kind of want to fold, but the whole idea of it being a home game is, you know what I mean? That's my take.
And that's what I did think. I mean, I wasn't too concerned. Like if it was just one-on-one with each of them, I wasn't too concerned. But the fact that they were both in, I just thought, man, I wasn't sure I was good. But I did think, well, if not, then I would rebuy too. So yeah, I ended up calling.
And by the way, too, if you did fold, I'll tell you, I'll give you a little professional advice, because I know we're going to get to your question afterwards. The way that I conduct myself professionally, hero calls, especially in this environment. Like if I somehow was invited to this environment, if I folded here, okay, and let's say, God forbid, I was correct and someone had a set, or I was wrong and I had the best hand, I would say absolutely nothing. If you want to approach the game as a professional, as a for-profit player, where you're that much better than everybody else, which just kind of sounds like from what you had told me a little bit in your email from the background, you're trying to do this for profit, I wouldn't say anything. I would not brag about the fact that I folded king. That's not the type of like player that these guys want, like in a private game like this. But anyways, okay, so hero calls.
Yeah, I called, and button ends up turning over Jack 10 of spades.
Oh, okay, so top pair and a flush draw. Okay. Uh-huh.
And small blind had ace queen of clubs.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
He had been felted a couple times, so I think he was.
Wow, what a great spot. I mean, you're flipping against Jack 10 here. Well, what's funny is it kind of sucks that I mean, you actually want that small blind in the hand because you want that dead money because you're not that far behind, but you're probably only going to be maybe against these two hands, you might only be about 40% here, again, to beat both hands, what I'm saying here, but I mean, you sort of want that. So he's got a backdoor straight draw, backdoor club draw. And again, he probably should just shove all in pre-flop. This is why people play the short stack so badly. So did you end up holding up?
Yeah, yeah, it did hold up. I don't remember the run out, but yeah,
Okay.
they held up. Oof.
Well, nice hand. That's an interesting one. Now, let's get to your other question real quickly here, because I know you had emailed me a couple of weeks ago about this, about bankroll.
Yeah, I was asking, I wanted to start playing for profit, more seriously. And obviously I want to pay off my debt and stuff. And I usually track my, sessions, and I've always felt like I was a winning player, but last year I trained under Nate, one of your coaches there.
Oh, okay.
And it is, yeah, it's extremely been extremely helpful. But I want to start, tracking it for like the next 2 years. I just don't know how many hours I need to look to, I can obviously look and see how many dollars per hour I'm making now, which seems good. But, like I said, I play once or twice a week, and it's only been since January. So I
Well,
know that that's not a good sample size whatsoever.
I think the absolute bare minimum, and people from online would laugh at me when I say this, because it's so few hands. The absolute bare minimum to start thinking about where you are in a certain game is 500 hours live. And that, I mean, and that's really, that could be as little as 15,000 hands. And like I said, people from online would like laugh at me. I think 1,000 hours is a better sample. So, if you've only played 2 times a week since January, so say you've played like 12 times, it doesn't sound like you've probably even put in like 100 hours.
I've got 150 hours.
Yeah, it's just, so I would wait until you play 4 times that amount to start thinking about making any type of life move based upon what you think you can make in the game. And that is still kind of small. I don't want to get too personal. I know you had brought it back in the email, but again, it's like one of these situations where there is a difference between playing part-time, where you are like you're set up right here. I assume you still have a job if you're playing a couple times a week. If you still keep your job and you're playing a couple times a week, you can be much more aggressive with your bankroll than, say, God forbid, if you quit your job and then you were doing this full time and this was your only source of income, and you had a risk of ruin where you couldn't necessarily dip back in or take any type of loan or something like that out to replenish your bankroll. People that have a legitimate risk of ruin playing full-time poker, that if they go to zero, they're out of the game, must be the most conservative with their bankroll, have the most amount of buy-ins, probably should be putting a few thousand hours in to really get a feel for what their actual win rate is. People that have jobs that are doing it for part-time profit that can replenish their bankroll, they don't have to worry about that stuff at that scale.
Right.
So
Exactly.
that would give you my take. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does actually. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks very much for the call, Joe.